Hi, thank you for joining me for our fourth episode of Clinical Insights from Child Language Cases. My name is Margo Kinzer Courter, and I will be your host and presenter for this evening. So I want to tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I will talk a little bit about the episodes that are already available on speechtherapypd.com's website. And then we'll talk a little bit about the case that we'll go through tonight. I am a speech language pathologist first and foremost, pediatrics my whole career. And that whole career is about 35 years at this point. I like to say that this profession chose me instead of me choosing it. It has always been just a wonderful ride. I am a board certified specialist in child language. And my love is regardless of our work setting, whether you're in the schools, you're in a clinic, you're in a private practice, you're in a hospital, our eye always has to be on student success. And success for them is their work, which is school. So as we talk tonight, and I talk about Julia's an eighth grader, and although she is not currently getting speech therapy at school, she's getting private therapy. But regardless of your setting, if you have a student like Julia, you will hopefully find some great strategies to work on derivational morphology. So a little bit about episodes 1 and 2 that you can find on speechtherapypd.com. Those were geared around phonological awareness. So basically what we're doing is we're moving through those 5 domains of language. We're still in that form of the language. I'm taking you back to Bloom and Leahy, 1978. So we talked about phonological awareness, specifically phonemic awareness skills for a younger student, which is episode 1. Episode 2, we looked at 6-syllable patterns for an older student who was still having difficulty with reading and spelling multisyllabic words. Episode 3 was phonological awareness for a younger student. It was actually a second grader, Samantha, who was still having difficulty with inflectional morphology for speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And as we know, if I take you back to Roger Brown's MLU, that we really expect most of those inflectional morphemes to be developed by about 46 months. And we looked at the impact that that's going to have on following directions in the classroom, understanding something already happened in the past as something happens in the future. We looked at a research project by Henbesta, Oppel, and Mitchell. And Henbesta was a school-based speech language pathologist who teamed up with 2 second grade teachers to provide lessons on morphology. It was, I believe, 8 sessions, and really looked at the impact that it had on the student. I bring that up this evening, although that was based on a second grader, and tonight we're going to talk about an 8th grader. We're going to talk about that morphological knowledge versus morphological awareness a little bit tonight. And I'm going to show you an example of where those inflections are still causing some difficulty for Julia, who's our student for this evening, as we look at her ability to identify those in reading. So that kind of brings us up to where we are tonight. So Julia's an 8th grader. I'm going to give you lots of information in regard to Julia, and then I'm going to give you strategies that I currently use with Julia, in addition to a couple of other strategies in regard to some research that's been done by Wolter and Green back in 2013. They developed a supplement to go along with it, and I pulled a few things for you this evening as well. We always talk about collaboration, and again, collaboration is going to be dependent on your environment. If you're in a school, that collaboration can be with any other school staff member and parents. In private practice, we hope that you will have access still to resource. If you are here in the United States, staff, but in particularly parents, and making sure we have that connection. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to go through just some information about Julia. And then what we're going to do is switch over to slides to talk about some strategies as well. So first thing we're going to do is pull up the International Classification of Function that I have adapted for speech language pathologist. And we'll look at that first, and then we'll go to the slide deck from there. Both my slide deck and the worksheet are available on speechtherapypd.com's website. So as you went into this presentation, you should have gone down to a section and been able to find both of those. I do know that the slide deck was updated as of this evening as well, so it should be current with what I'm talking about today. So again, both of these will be available on speechtherapypd.com's website. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All righty. So what you should be seeing right now is the ICF worksheet. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Julia and where she's continuing to have difficulty. And what I want to do is be able to look at kind of the difference between inflectional morphology and derivational morphology. I always joke and say that I always thought, with the little ones when I was working early intervention, preschool, even, into kindergarten, first grade, and for some of our students, second, third, fourth, that I was working on those inflectional endings, I'd be like, oh, I'm finished. They're in place at this point. Not so much thinking about prefixes, suffixes, and root words. And as I started getting more into the research and more into seeing where the students were still struggling, I went, oh, I'm not quite done yet. Because there really isn't a whole lot of curriculum that works specifically on affixes, but it's in all the academic standards. So it's interesting to really kind of think about that it is in the standards, it's being measured, but not necessarily explicitly taught. So what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about this case, and kind of the importance of those affixes at this point is that it actually changes the meaning of the word. It changes the part of speech and it changes the meaning. Unlike inflections that really just change the quantity, the time, so past tense versus present progressive, or comparison, that ER, EST. So these are actually going to change the meaning of the words. So let's look a little bit at Julia. And Julia is 13. She is in the 8th grade. And here's a little bit of history on her. She continues to demonstrate some difficulty with derivational morphology. And again, we're going to talk about the difference between knowledge and awareness as well. And in addition to it impacting her ability to read and write multisyllabic words, it's also impacting her vocabulary development. We're going to look at some research that shows that about 60% of words that students encounter through text as they get older are morphologically complex. So it is really important to make sure that, especially those most common prefixes and suffixes, those most common roots are in place for our students. We're going to mostly be talking about prefixes and suffixes this evening. She began receiving language therapy in kindergarten for an overall language delay. She does now have a diagnosis of developmental language disorder. What happened at about moving into middle school, she was reassessed and language skills came up into that average range. She had some other physical issues, some attention deficit, some other things going on that she was reclassified at that point. School-based language therapy stopped. She continued to have an IEP. We'll talk a little bit about that, and continued to receive some resource help. It's language therapy at school ceased. I stayed involved on that private side for her. Fast forward into between 7th and 8th grade, she was reassessed by a neuropsychologist. Those language skills had dropped again. So instead of the parents going back to the school asking for that reclassification one more time, they continued just to be with me from private therapy, with me coordinating with the resource teacher at school for her. So as we look at this derivational morphology for her, what you see here is just some information in regard to, we're really talking about prefixes and suffixes during our time together. And we know that it's essential for phonological awareness, which is episodes 1 and 2. It is essential also for vocabulary development, which will be a further episode in the future as well. All right, so let me just scroll on down. So the next thing we have on our worksheet is just looking at each of our areas, each of our domains of language and metalinguistic skills. So here's just a little bit more about Julia. Phonological awareness, she continues to have difficulty identifying the affixes. We'll look at a video of her where she's actually left off a past tense ed as she's reading as well. So those inflections continue to come into play a little bit for her. Although she uses those for spoken language, she's still having some difficulty on those when she's reading aloud as well. So she continues to have difficulty identifying affixes as well as syllable patterns for encoding and decoding. So both phonological awareness and morphological awareness continue to impact her. It's moderate at this point. She understands the meaning of prefixes and suffixes as they're targeted, but continues to have difficulty segmenting these when reading, especially identifying ones that haven't been targeted and identifying that those may be potential affixes. When I talk about affixes, I'm talking about prefixes and suffixes. Morphological awareness overall, she's beginning to apply these affixes for understanding vocabulary. And we've been working a lot on that in therapy. I can still tell you that I would still rate it mild to moderate difficulty for her. Again, I just listed a possible assessment. We only have one currently that I'm aware of that meets her age group, and that's called the TERM, which is the test of expressive and receptive morphology, a relatively new test that goes from 6.0 to 1711, and I have that hyperlinked for you on the worksheet. Morphosyntax, we really look at verb voice and clause structure. So verb voice from that morphological perspective. Again, I'm going to show you a video where she's still dropping ED, which is going to change the meaning. She continues to have mild to moderate difficulties with that verb voice, moderate for clause structure. For the level that she is reading, most of the verb voices she has, and that, again, that morphological awareness continues to impact from that verb voice perspective. Semantics, again, we're going to look at morphology from the perspective that if you understand that un means not, if I know that root word, that base word, I can figure out when it's applied to it. So if I know the word fold and I see unfold, if I know that un means not, I can get to the meaning of unfold. If a teacher says we need to redo that assignment, if I know re means to do again, I know that we're having to do an assignment over. So again, those affixes continue to impact semantics for her as well. Pragmatics, nothing to do with morphology, but with that diagnosis of developmental language disorder, we're still seeing some of those executive function areas that are causing difficulty, such as flexibility in thinking. So that ability to see something somebody else's way, that ability to really kind of think through somebody else's perspective. And Julia does continue to show that. Again, not part of what's going on with us this evening, but just a broader picture of who she is as a student with developmental language disorder. When we kind of look at metalinguistics at this point, although a lot of our therapy, especially with her being in 8th grade, what do you think that means? Why would we use that? That's a lot of our therapy, but what we're really looking at with reasoning skills from that metalinguistic perspective, we know that ability to use what you know is really pulls into that metalinguistics, making that conscientious effort to say, oh, that was a prefix, oh, that was a suffix. It changes the part of speech, changes the meaning. And she continues to have difficulty with that application. So scrolling on down to activities and participation, we know that it's continuing to impact auditory comprehension because it is impacting understanding of vocabulary. It's impacting the difficulty using prefixes and suffixes to use more multisyllabic words to express herself. It is impacting reading and language overall. Behavior, it's not impacting. Learning, it is impacting, and the participation in class, home, and community. We're going to scroll on down. When we look at environmental factors, she has good family support. At school, she has resource support, and she can have an IEP And like I talked about, she sees me privately. If you are a school-based speech language pathologist, again, a lot of the strategies that I'm going to show you continue to apply as well. Number 4 is personal factors. Motivation, unbelievable. Cognitively, the neuropsych testing is showing an IQ of around 90, 95. But with just resource support at school, tutoring, and private speech therapy, she's maintaining A's and B's in a traditional regular classroom. Self-esteem decreased overall due to the developmental language disorder and that flexibility in thinking, not necessarily in regard to morphology and how it's impacting her. Cultural background, goals are not impacted based on cultural background. Very motivated. She does her best to learn and apply whatever we are working on. So when we look at the slide deck, again, that's also on speechtherapypd.com. In this session, we are going to look at this research that I have listed for you here as well. The other thing I want to say is if you have comments or questions, please go ahead. And I see a few rolling in chat. Please feel free to add those to chat. Your questions can go into chat as well, or they can go in the question and answer section too. And we will reflect on a lot of these as we move through, but we'll save time at the end for the comments as well as any questions that you have. So please keep those rolling in as we move through today. All right. And again, we'll look at that research. We're going to look at the definition, the difference between morphological knowledge and morphological awareness. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well as we move through. As we go down to our summary, areas of need that we're going to talk about in this episode is really looking at that derivational morphology for her to support phonological awareness and semantics as well. Works diligently to apply. So here's the goals that I currently have for her. By the end of 8th grade, Julia will increase morphological knowledge and production of common prefixes and suffixes. I truly feel that our role as speech language pathologists is to really look at targeting the most common prefixes and suffixes, using explicit systematic instruction so that we can make sure that we have given enough exposure for the students to truly learn them to be able to apply them. So I really do not move much out of those most common prefixes and suffixes with the students. Now, again, we're really not going to talk a lot about Greek and Latin roots tonight. I have had some high school students that I have supported that were going to the technical school for their CNA or their med tech license. And then we targeted those roots that they needed to understand the medical terms. So again, that's an opportunity to do that. But I don't, unless I'm also working in fiction with them and it comes up, then I'll target it that way as well. So for Julia, the prefixes anti, dis, for, in, im, ill, and inter, mis, and non. From a suffix perspective, able and ible, that al, IC, ION, which also is the TION or the SION, IVE, OUS, and ATE. As observed in language therapy data collection, in her spelling, which will be in her segmenting and blending, and her reading and understanding. And I do have a link there for reading rockets, and we will look at that a little bit as well. And then the next goal is by the end of 8th grade, she'll increase morphological awareness to generalize information on how morphemes are used to change the meaning as observed in language therapy data collection, vocabulary application, spelling, and reading. So those are our main goals for her. And I'm going to go ahead and address this question. It says, does she currently have language and speech services at school? So when she did as a younger student, and when the neuropsychologist did language testing at 7th and 8th grade, those scores had dropped. Parents chose at that point to stay with private therapy. School-based speech language pathology ended at 5th grade when she was reassessed and her scores had come in within the average range. Again, she still has other health impairment. She also has a physical impairment that has kept the IEP and has kept resource support for her as well. So I think it's important to go ahead and clarify that at this point. Suggested interventions. We're going to look at a lot that we apply to vocabulary, to semantics. And I am going to use those same strategies that I target for semantics to target the morphology. So that's going to be a knowledge rating scale. I'll show you what that is. We're going to look a little bit at the Freyer model. We're also going to look at applying to vocabulary, syntax, and phonology. We'll look at collaboration and choosing words that are contained within the curriculum. And then again, a little bit about applying it to a case study. The next thing that I have on here is our overall objective for Julia. She'll increase morphological awareness and morphological knowledge for common affixes in speaking, listening, reading, and writing to complete morphological awareness, phonological awareness, semantic, and morphosyntactic activities. Collaboration at this point with this specific case study, because she's only receiving private therapy at this point, I am still collaborating with the resource teacher, as well as Julia is bringing her schoolwork into therapy, and we are using that in order to continue to target the derivational morphology that we're talking about this evening, as well as the other language areas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the slide deck. Again, this should be on speechtherapypd.com's website as well. All right, you should see the full slide that says Clinical Insights from Child Language Cases. Meet Julia. Please note that due to confidentiality, any videos that I have of Julia in this session are restricted. So although you will see my links there, because you have my presentation for this evening, you will not be able to access those recordings. Materials available at courtercommunication.com. I'll talk to you about, as we move through, what's available out there on the website. If it's your first time to go out to my website, you'll just need to create your own account, and then you'll have access to all the materials that are out there. There's a lot in regard to all of our areas of language, executive function. Just keep scrolling down and you'll get to morphology. Our overall objectives for our clinical insight case studies is to review the case history, which we just did, and discuss the impact that the language disorder is having on participation, academically and socially, determine the severity of the impact, which we just looked at for her, and then develop therapy goals and intervention. We've looked at all of those except intervention, which is where we're heading now. So I just want to talk a little bit, and I go through this with each of our episodes as we go through. But this is taking you back to Bloom and Leahy 1978, where they took our 5 domains of language and they separated them into the form, content, and use. Then what I did is I overlaid what this means from a speaking and listening perspective to a reading and writing perspective, as well as kind of looking at, for students with speech sound disorders, the impact that it may have as well, and then pulling in the metalinguistic skills. So let's just take a peek at this for just a minute. So as we look at that form of the language, we know that that is morphology, phonology, and syntax. We know that beginning reading, so reading fluency and accuracy, is truly based on our 2 domains of morphology and phonology. We also know from the research of speech sound disorders, we have research that says if a speech sound disorder goes past 5 years, 9 months, we have other research that says if it goes past 6 years, 9 months, those students score lower than their peers on morphology and phonology. Again, speech sound disorders can have a direct impact on that beginning reading fluency and accuracy. When we look at the content of the language, we're talking about semantics. And then we know that as we pull in syntax from the form of the language, semantics is the content, pragmatics and those metalinguistic skills, those are what students need for that reading, auditory and reading comprehension. So, and we'll pull a little bit of those metalinguistic or supralinguistic skills in as we go through. So why is it important that we continue to teach morphology? So I want to talk a little bit about the English language, just to kind of dig a little deeper in regard to how complex English is, as we all know, because we chose to be speech language pathologists. We know that it is considered a deep, or you'll often see the word opaque orthographic language because of the morphology and the phonological awareness piece that comes into English. And then as we look a little deeper, it also pulls in the etymology from other languages as well. So as we talk about that phonemic piece, we know that English lacks that one-to-one correspondence of letter and sound. Unlike Spanish, for example, that you have the letter and you know what sound it makes. English doesn't always match up that way. We have 26 letters, which is equivalent to about 44 sounds. We know that 50% of words in English are predictable based on the sound and symbol. About 36 are predictable except for one sound. About 4% are truly irregular. We know that English is made up of a lot of other languages. And this is interesting too, because this is going to impact that phonemic awareness. It's also going to impact the morphology, those Greek and Latin roots that we see. As we talk about that basic vocabulary, we know that most of those words come from Anglo-Saxon as well. And then we're going to look at morphology. It helps maintain that spelling base, which is going to support that phonemic awareness as well. And it breaks down that multisyllabic word that our students need as they get older. And then it also supports vocabulary. So this is a little bit starting through that evidence information that you have. So you've got all of the sources in the worksheet, and I'm just going to kind of summarize those at this point as well. Again, if you have questions or comments, please put those into the chat, and it's easier for me to answer them that way for you as well. We know that teaching morphology will improve vocabulary, break down complex words from a phonological awareness perspective. It's going to improve auditory and reading comprehension because it's also going to improve semantics, and it promotes those meta-linguistic skills as well. We know that as we look at that link, this is just an example. So I'm going to show you a video of Julia with the word misfortune or misfortunate. And so let's just take that as an example. So let's say that I am working on that prefix of miss. From a phonological perspective, being able to look at a word, identify that prefix or a suffix to be able to separate that out. So if I can see, let's take the word misunderstand. So if I can take that word and I can see M-I-S together, I can chunk that for miss. I can do that I know that E-R says so I get my der, and then I get stand. So then we can blend that back together, misunderstand. Applying it to vocabulary, if I know that miss means wrongly understood, then I can apply that to the word. From a syntax perspective, we look at how those affixes will change the meaning of the sentence as well, based on the knowledge of the words from that morphology perspective. As we continue to look at that evidence, we know that derivational words are learned 3 times faster than root words because they are familiar with what the student is hearing. They've already heard it. Let's redo that. So as soon as I see re in writing, I can make that connection. Oh, I already know what that means. So again, we're going to see those derivational words increase 3 times faster than new root words. The other reason that derivational morphology seems to develop a little quicker is because that the students are seeing it in writing. So we have research that says any time that we can demonstrate in writing for our students what we're working on from a speaking and listening perspective, it's going to support that as well. Again, as I already stated, about 60% of new words in middle school text are transparent and derived words, so they are dependent on those prefixes and suffixes. We know that morphological awareness skills are built on morphological knowledge, and I'm going to clarify that here in just a second. So we're just going to move from first grade up through high school. We know that in grades 1 through 3, they can use morphological knowledge to infer the meaning of unknown words. Grades 3 and 4 increase morphological knowledge. Grades 4 through 8 recognize morphologically complex words and study their parts to infer meaning of unfamiliar words. Grades 8 through 12 increase the ability to process morphologically complex words inflects the words to help with pronunciation. So let's talk a little bit about what is knowledge versus performance or awareness. So morphological knowledge is truly what we work on at the beginning of therapy. So it is that implicit understanding of the word formation. So when we talk about the rules, that a prefix goes on the beginning of the word, suffix goes on the end of the word. If we're working on miss, what does that mean? Okay, so it's what you know, what the student knows. Morphological awareness is where that metalinguistic piece comes in, and it's that ability to recognize, reflect on, and manipulate those units. So it's how you use it. So morphological knowledge, what the students know, morphological awareness, again, popping in the metalinguistic piece, how they use it. So I'm going to show you a quick video here. And what I want to show you is I want you to listen to as she is reading so you can see she leaves off an ED ending. So, and you can just see how I approached it from there.
Okay, let's see. In China, cat.
Okay, she is actually on the one under the one that is highlighted. So under culture, she's on number 2.
In China, cats were considered lucky and were depicted.
It's past tense.
Depicted
You got it.
in art.
You got it. All right, so I just wanted to show you that. So even though she's got those inflectional endings, you could see that I had to go back to morphological knowledge and just say it's past tense, and then she was able to apply it from there. All right, I'm going to show that again just in case you did not get to see it. Hold on just a second. Let me just share that again.
In China, cats were considered lucky and were depicted.
It's past tense.
Depicted.
You got it.
In art.
You got it.
What's depicted mean?
Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you again for your patience. I'm not seeing it. All right. I apologize. It looks like most of you were able to see it that time. I hope it did come up for you. All right. We should be back to the slide deck is what you should be seeing at this point. And you should see full slide at this point. All right. All right, so that's where we were. Wonderful, thank you. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties tonight. All right, sounds like all's good. All right, we are back in business. Here we go. All right, so where we were before our video didn't want to play was talking about knowledge versus awareness. I love that video because what you got to finally see was you could see that metalinguistic piece finally hit. So she figured out depict. I cued her on the past tense, and then there was this pause where she was like, what does depicted mean? And so that was pretty awesome too, because we got that affix in there, and now she's starting to identify words that she doesn't know, which will help with vocabulary as well. So again, what we're going to work on is the most common prefixes and suffixes. That's what we're going to teach first. Regardless of our work setting, anytime we can use materials that are being used in the classroom, whether that is any of the textbooks, whether that is the fiction or nonfiction that they're reading. Again, and a lot of times what I'll do is I will get those before and I will pre-teach it. So when we think about derivational morphology, we have bases and we have roots. And as we talk about that base, we know that some are considered free. That means they can stand alone, like the word play, like the word fold. And then the prefixes and suffixes are attached to those. And then we have what are called bound morphemes as that root, and that's coming from our Greek and Latin roots, such as ject. Ject can't stand alone unless it's got a prefix or suffix with it. So again, as we look at that base or those free morphemes, those are usually basic vocabulary words coming from Anglo-Saxon, and then those bound morphemes are coming from Greek and Latin. So the next thing I want to show you is where do we get these? Where do we get these roots to decide what we are going to work on? All right, so I'm going to try to take you out to a website here. Let's see what happens. And if this will please. So you will see a link there to Reading Rockets. All right, and hopefully this is going to share for you. So this is just a great resource for you. All right, let me know if you can't see it, but hopefully you can. So this is from Reading Rockets, and it's just a really good resource for you to be able to look for what prefixes and suffixes am I going to work on. So it starts with going through the most common Latin roots, then the most common Greek roots. You can download a copy. Then it goes into the most common prefixes. Then, and there's some videos in there as well and some demonstrations. And then it goes into the most common suffixes from there. And you can download copies. Again, we're going to talk about that explicit instruction. And there's a couple of videos built in here in addition to some that I'm going to show you as well. So again, just a resource there for you for Reading Rockets. So let's talk a little bit about explicit instruction. And so what we're going to do is look at what does explicit systematic sequential instruction mean? And basically what we're going to be looking at is, to me, the most important is making sure the students are understanding what we're working on, talking about those prefixes and suffixes, and then also making sure as we move through with activities that they have enough exposure to truly make it their own. That's what we're really looking at, and being able to apply that knowledge. So here is a couple examples of some videos in regard to that can be used for that morphological awareness. So again, as part of explicit instruction, this will be the first part of it. And I'm going to go through a little different way to try to get these to show for you. So give me just a second and let me move screens, and hopefully you'll be able to see them. So this is the first one. Again, these are hyperlinked for you.
Can you hear what fits before the root of a word, before the word is heard? That's a prefix, there it sits. Once it becomes applied, the word is modified. Like this, discover, triangle, submarine, subterranean. In some way, now that the word has changed, there will be something new for us to say. Can you hear what fits after the root of a word, after the word is heard? That's a suffix, there it sits. Once it becomes applied, the word is modified. Like full, eventful, in beginning, ness, happiness, thoughtfulness, goodness, and kindness. Now that the word has changed, there will be something new for us to say.
And again, that one goes on from there. So let me show you a second one as well that may be more appropriate for older students. Again, let me just switch screens for you here to hopefully make sure that it shows up. All right, here's another one. Again, that may be more appropriate for your older students.
Wizard of Words.
Yo, OnStar,
Yeah,
you got the magic wand, my friend.
oh I do. And let me show you how to do it. I'm a wizard of words, casting prefixes here. You put them before a word and a new word appears. Poof, shazam, poof, poof, shazam. Poof, shazam, poof, poof, shazam.
Prefixes and suffixes change a word's definition.
Hocus pocus lightning bolt, he's a lyrical magician.
Thanks.
Poof, shazam, poof, poof, shazam. Poof, shazam, poof, poof, shazam. A prefix is a group of letters added before a word.
A word.
It changes the meaning and it makes a brand new word.
Sing it, nerds.
Miss is a prefix, it means wrong.
I'll make a totally new word with my magic wand.
Spell,
Poof.
misspell. Read,
Poof.
misread. Match,
Poof.
mismatch. Judge,
Poof.
misjudge.
Oh.
This is a prefix, it means not.
Mix it in the magic brew in my wizard pot. What up?
Like,
Poof.
dislike. Agree,
Poof.
disagree. Continue,
Poof.
discontinue. Appear,
Poof.
disappear.
Bye-bye.
Pre is a prefix, it means before.
I got a lot of magic.
All right. So again, in regard to that explicit instruction, that is just a couple of videos to explain to the students what you're working on and why you are working on them. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just that systematic sequential instruction. Again, determine what morphemes you're going to work on. Again, I stick with the most common prefixes and suffixes, and then moving through those in a developmental order. The next is just, as we all do in therapy, is just making sure that step 3 is we're constantly assessing and revising what is working and what is not working. And again, we want to make sure that we are given as much exposure for the students to truly make it their own. Part of our episodes and on our clinical insights into child language cases is to really talk about collaboration. Again, depending on your setting, we're really looking at 4 different ways to collaborate. One is to be the lead. So if you have more experience in working on prefixes and suffixes, you could do some lessons within the classroom. You could do a station, you can team teach, or as I'm doing with Julia, is working from a consultative perspective. So again, as I said in the very beginning, what we're going to do is to apply some strategies that we use for semantics, and we're going to use those same strategies to work on our prefixes and suffixes. The first one being the knowledge rating scale. And this is on my website for you. So if this is a tool that would be beneficial, it is available out there for you under semantics. So what the students do, and I'll give you an example, is as I'm using it for prefixes and suffixes, I will write down just the prefix without a word or just the suffix without a word. Students have to determine whether they know the word or they don't know it. So for example, stage 1, they've never seen it or heard it before. Stage 2, they heard it, but don't exactly know what it means. So kind of from a vocabulary perspective, they heard liberty and justice for all in the Pledge of Allegiance. So they know that liberty must be something good. Stage 3, know the word within the context that they've seen it. So they might know the word misunderstand, but they don't know the word misfortunate. Stage 4, they know it well in a variety of words. So this is what it looks like. So for Julia, from a prefix perspective, we're working on anti, and again, we'll work on these 1 or 2 at a time, depending on what she is able to do and to get enough exposures from. I'm going to give you an example of miss if the videos work as we continue through. Suffixes did the same thing. Again, Julia just rates those of whether she knows them or not. So the next thing we can do is we can apply the Freire model, which again is a way that we work on vocabulary. So instead of the vocabulary word going in the middle, what goes in the middle is the prefix or suffix, the definition, and then we're going to, for a picture, apply it to a familiar word. So Julia knows the word understand, so we applied it to misunderstand. And then a sentence to demonstrate the meaning. She messed up the assignment because she misunderstood the direction. So we went to irregular past tense as well from that inflectional perspective. From there, what we did is we applied it to a variety of words. So here's mistake, mistaken, misplace, misfortune, mislead, and misbehave. And again, then what Julia can do is she can look at each of these words and decide. So for example, she knows what the word mistake means, to make an error. But when we added that irregular en to the end for mistaken, and we changed the part of speech, Julia at that point had seen it. Oh, I was mistaken about that, but she no longer knew the meaning of that word. So again, we can go back, talk a little bit more about the roots, and then apply from there. So let's apply this to phonological awareness and that syllable division. So mistake would be a closed syllable with a vowel consonant E in the root word. Mistaken, we got to drop the E on take to add the EN affix to the N. Misfortunate, we're going to drop the E to add the ATE. Misunderstand, we have a closed syllable on the MIS, meaning the consonants at the end to make it a short vowel. We have the same thing for un and the same thing for stand. And then we have a vowel plus R for the DER. So again, I can apply, because remember that English is this complex, deep, opaque language. So we have to apply those prefixes, suffixes, and the rules that we know from a phonological awareness perspective. So I'm going to do my best to try to show you another video. Let's see how this goes here. And Julia was reading a book called The Little Prince. And one of the sentences in there was, I like my misfortunes to be taken seriously. So then what we're going to do is look at a video of, hopefully, misfortune. If I can get it to pop up for you. Give me just a second to switch screens.
Didn't really seem to appear. You didn't think it was
Let me start again, please.
misfortunes. It's like unfortunate. You didn't really seem to appear. You didn't think it was gonna happen, but then it happens. Bad luck.
I love it, the last part. Yep.
Bad.
Not something good that happened, right? And what gives you a hint on that word?
Miss.
Yep. So how about if I took miss off and I gave you the word fortunate?
Fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
I know what fortunate means. It's bound to happen.
Okay. How about if I say you are really fortunate to go to a great school? What would I mean?
That you're lucky.
Okay, very good. And again, we went in that next word. That next word goes into that TION as well. And again, we would go through that same scenario. And you should be back to the full screen that says video in action. So again, what does this sentence mean? And then we took it into the syntax as well. So I like my misfortunes to be taken seriously. What would that mean? I like my bad luck to be taken seriously. So again, then what I would do is go back to our knowledge rating scale and have her put the definition of that prefix in. Miss something wrong or incorrect. All right. This is another activity, be a word detective. And so for Julia now, I have targeted these prefixes that you see here. I've targeted those suffixes and applied it to root words that she knows. So then the goal is at this point to figure out how many words I can put together. So this is based on, there was a game on the market a long time ago called syllabification, maybe on your shelf somewhere. It's a beautiful pink long box that had these tiles. And what you did is you arranged them to make new words. So basically I took that idea from that game and applied it. So just some examples, we can do unlikable, unbelievable, uncomfortable. Again, if your student's not ready to do a prefix and a suffix in both words, so I may target this for un and re, And then once I target those suffixes, come back and use the same one and extend it out from there. So then you have another example on the next page with just some additional words. Another strategy is we took the word fortune, meaning chance or luck. And then what we did is based on how we changed it with the prefixes and suffixes, we also talked about how it changes the part of speech. So for example, fortunate is an adjective. Fortunately becomes an adverb. Unfortunate is an adjective. Unfortunately becomes that adverb again. Misfortune is a noun. Misfortunate goes back to being an adjective. The next one that I added, and again, there is a handout on my website from Wolter and Green. It says supplement on it. And this is one of the activities. They did a research project that they basically looked at that morphological awareness and increasing morphological awareness with targeting it directly. They developed the activities to go along with that research project. And this is one of it, which is Morph It. So it basically just takes what I just showed you in that picture and then just takes a word. Students have to decide if it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. If the student's having difficulty figuring that out, you can use it in a sentence. Again, anytime you can write that down, then what they can do from there is to figure out, based on how it was used in the sentence, what is its function, which is going to increase that morphosyntax piece of it. And keep those questions rolling in. We're going to take care of those in just a second here. We're going to skip the next one. And then what we're going to do is we are going to go to questions, and then I'm going to circle back around to takeaways. So let's go ahead. Again, if you have any questions, let's pop them into chat. That would be easiest at this point, except for the questions and answers. So just pop your question into chat. So let's go back and look at a couple of questions. And I'm just going to go through some comments as we go through as well. I like, what does dis mean in discover? Again, we have to go back and look at the meaning of cover and the different ways that it can be used. What we also have to figure out is sometimes what looks to be a prefix is not a prefix and it's part of a base word. So I'm going to put that back on the person who put that in there to see if it's truly a prefix or is it part of the total word discover. I'm going to put that back on you. Some kids learn better through movement, so I could see where the second video was really helpful. Absolutely, get them up and moving. Somebody else liked the videos for that explicit instruction. All right, let me look through here. Do you have separate lessons on spelling rules? For example, happiness, drop the Y and change it to I. I integrate those. I believe out of my website, I do have a list of those rules. If not, you can also contact me off the website and I will send it to you and then I will pop it out there as well. So I incorporate that in, wouldn't it be so nice if we could work on just derivational morphology? But as we can see, we built it into syntax. He likes his misfortunes to be seen. So again, I built it into the syntax. I built in the meta-linguistics. So I would build those rules in as we go through too. Same way with the slide that I showed you that had those syllable patterns that I talked about. That was a vowel consonant E. That was a closed syllable. All of those rules are in episode 2 of this series. So again, if you go back to speech therapy PD, you can put in my name or you can put in clinical insights from child language cases. Number 2 brings up those specific 6-syllable patterns for multisyllabic words. And again, I think the other spelling rules are out on my website. If not, let me know. How do you go about picking the words to go with the knowledge rating scale? To me, this is where that collaboration piece is really important. If I can, again, get textbooks and see what's being used, if I can get the fiction that they are reading, the stories or books that they're reading in the class, I will pull it from there. So for example, one of the most common prefixes is miss. When we were reading The Little Prince as summer reading this last summer, it talked about misfortunes. So I targeted that most common prefix at that point, applied it first and foremost to that word misfortune so that we could understand the meaning of basically the whole book came down to understanding about Little Prince's misfortunes. And then what I did is I applied it to other familiar words from there. If you want to target it a little bit more from that semantic perspective, I would start with words that are roots that are known or bases that are known, apply it to that, then target other vocabulary words that it can then be applied to. So I would talk about the meaning of the root word as a whole word. Then I would come back and apply any of the prefixes or suffixes that we have talked about and worked on through our explicit instruction to bring together with that. How do you respond if a prefix or suffix is added to a word that doesn't produce a real word? Actually, I walked into a classroom one day and it was a multi-level classroom. It was a private school for students with learning differences. So middle school was multi-aged. And I walked in one day and they were playing the syllabification game that I talked about that came in that pink box. And they were laughing and having fun. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And what they were truly doing is making up words. And take it because it is part of that exposure to show that they really understand what it means, then take it into real words as well, because then we're increasing the vocabulary along with it. Recommendations for collaborative and complementary approaches when students receive multi-sensory reading intervention that targets morphology heavily. Again, what that comes down to is I would look to see how they are targeting that morphology and know that let's go back to some research in regard to vocabulary. There was a couple different research studies that were done. One was done actually with kindergartners that showed that they needed an average of 36 exposures to a word to make it their own. We also have research that students with developmental language disorder need 2 to 3 times more exposure than their peers. So I guess my big question would be in regard to that collaboration. Are they getting enough exposures? And I always keep that. There was some other research that was done based on IQ and exposures. So for example, for vocabulary, for students with an average IQ of 100, it still showed that they needed 35 exposures to truly learn a word. I apply that to these prefixes and suffixes as well. Are they getting enough exposures to truly make those words their own? Maybe what you can do in that collaborative effort is apply it to more vocabulary. So maybe your goal is to take that heavy morphology that they're working on, apply it to new vocabulary from the speech and language perspective. Okay. I think that is all the questions. Again, you have access to me at any point. You can hit me off of the website, which is on that first slide. So let's go back into our slide deck and let's do some takeaways here. And we will be finished up in about 2 minutes. All right. So you should be able to see the slide that says takeaways. Again, we talked about that morphological knowledge being what you know, and then morphological awareness is that ability to apply it where that metalinguistic piece comes in. We know that working on derivational morphology is going to improve vocabulary. It's going to help break down complex words for that reading and writing. It's going to improve auditory and reading comprehension because we're improving semantics, and it's going to promote critical thinking. Our goal today during our time was our objectives for the clinical insight is to review that case history. We talked about Julia. We looked at where Julia is in all of those domains of language, focusing in on that derivational morphology. Again, wouldn't it be nice if we could just work on this one area, but we know that we have to work on the others. And that's why I love that question in regard to collaboration. Orton Gillingham adds a lot of that morphology, if by chance that's what she's getting. I know you fly and some of those other programs do as well. Apply it to what you're working on. Apply it to the syntax. Do they understand that prefix on that word within the meaning of the sentence? Apply it to the context, apply it to semantics and new words. And we looked at the severity for her at this point is mild to moderate because of the amount of therapy she's getting and the number of exposures. And then we looked at those interventions. To finish up our time together, we know that about 60% of new words in middle school student text are morphologically complex. So what that means is when we work on inflectional morphology with the younger students, our job is not finished. We have to make sure that we as speech language pathologists are also working on those most common prefixes and suffixes. I want to add one more piece to this for those of you that work with younger students and you're still working on inflections. Please know that these derivations are already being used. Students, we have to redo that. Our students are hearing that in kindergarten and first grade. Please unfold your paper. So again, even for those of you that are working on inflections, don't forget to add some of those most common prefixes and suffixes to those words that the students are hearing in the classroom. Thank you for joining me for Clinical Insights to Child Language Cases. This was episode 4, Meet Julia, Derivational Morphology in Older Students. I look forward to seeing you for episode 5, which will be morphosyntax. We're going to do a longitudinal study with that, and we're going to look at strategies from our youngest students to our older students. It has been a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.